The Obamas are yesterday's news. No one cares about them anymore. They did everything in their power to defeat Trump both times, and they lost.
Michelle Obama took the stage at the Democratic National Convention, delivering what the media called a powerful speech. But Megyn Kelly saw something they didn't, something shocking, something no one was supposed to notice.
Michelle Obama is going to be my focus. We'll get to Barack Obama too, but let's just start with Michelle. She was the star.
Was Michelle Obama's speech a heartfelt call for unity? Or was it a carefully planned distraction from the Democrats' failures? And why did her words sound less like support for Biden and more like a quiet admission that his presidency was a disaster? Let's discover the DNC and the Obamas' role. Chicago, August 2024. The Democratic National Convention was in full swing, but something felt different this time. The energy was tense, the stakes were higher, and behind the polished speeches and coordinated messaging, one thing was clear: the Democratic Party was in crisis mode. And then Michelle Obama stepped onto the stage. But was this really the defining moment the Democrats needed? Or was it just another carefully scripted political performance? More importantly, was Michelle Obama's speech really about inspiring hope? Or was she quietly signaling her party's own failures? And why did Megyn Kelly's reaction to this speech expose something the mainstream media refuses to talk about? The DNC was always going to be a defining moment for the Democratic Party. Joe Biden had stepped down. Not retired, not finished his term, stepped down. The sitting president of the United States, after months of weak polling and visible struggles on the campaign trail, was gone. His departure wasn't framed as a failure, of course. The official narrative painted it as a gracious decision for the good of the country, but everyone knew the truth. The Democratic leadership forced Biden out because they knew he couldn't win. And that left a major problem. With Biden out, Kamala Harris was now the nominee. But there was just one issue: nobody really wanted her. Harris had spent 4 years as Biden's vice president, and in that time, her approval ratings had remained historically low. Even among Democratic voters, enthusiasm for her candidacy was lukewarm at best. So the party needed a rallying figure, someone who could reset the narrative, energize the base, and cover up the fractures within the party. And that's why they turned to the most influential couple in modern Democratic politics, the Obamas. Because make no mistake, Barack and Michelle Obama are still the biggest stars of the Democratic Party. Their influence hasn't faded, their connections remain deep, and when the party is in trouble, they are the ones called in to clean up the mess. Barack Obama's fingerprints were all over the DNC, even though he wasn't the one delivering the marquee speech. His endorsement carries more weight than any other living Democrat. His network of donors, strategists, and media allies ensures that the party remains aligned with his vision. And behind the scenes, reports suggest he played a role in convincing Biden to step aside. But it was Michelle Obama who took center stage. She was introduced as a voice of inspiration, a beacon of hope in uncertain times. The speech itself was classic Michelle, polished, emotional, full of carefully crafted messaging designed to resonate with everyday Americans. She spoke about how the country was going through difficult times, about how people were feeling hopeless, about how the nation needed leadership that could bring people together. The audience ate it up. The media swooned. Social media erupted with praise. But there was something off about the whole thing. Because if America was in such dark times, as Michelle Obama claimed, who was responsible for that? The Democratic Party has held the White House for the past 4 years. They controlled Congress for the first 2 years of Biden's presidency. They have held power in many of the nation's largest cities and most powerful institutions. So if the country is struggling, if people feel hopeless, if leadership is failing, how can the same party that created these problems now claim to be the solution? Once you see it, you'll never look at this speech the same way again. Megyn Kelly's critique and the hypocrisy of hope. In a brutal and unfiltered response to Michelle Obama's speech at the Democratic National Convention, Megyn Kelly called out the sheer hypocrisy that no one in the mainstream media dared to touch. And she was absolutely right. Because in the middle of all the polished rhetoric, the standing ovations, and the breathless praise from political commentators, there was one glaring contradiction that Michelle Obama either didn't realize or hoped that no one would notice. She stood on stage, looked America in the eye, and declared that hope is making a comeback. But hope from what? Hope from whom? She described a country that was struggling, divided, uncertain about the future. But her party has been in power for the last 4 years. She wasn't talking about the Trump administration. She wasn't warning people about a potential second term for Trump. No, she was talking about the state of America under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And yet, not a single major media outlet asked the obvious question. If things are so bad, isn't that an admission that Biden and Harris have failed? Megyn Kelly, however, asked that question directly. She pointed out that Michelle Obama's speech, whether intentional or not, was a clear indictment of the Biden administration. Because you can't say that America is in dark times while also expecting people to re-elect the party that created those conditions in the first place. It's like trying to sell someone a car by first explaining how terrible it is. And that's not just a rhetorical mistake, it's a massive political miscalculation. The Democratic Party has spent the last 4 years insisting that they were making things better, that Biden was a stabilizing force after Trump, that their policies were leading to progress. But now, at the most important event of their campaign, Michelle Obama went on stage and told the country that things were still bad, that people were still struggling, that there was still no real unity. Why would she say this? Why would the Democrats allow one of their most powerful figures to push a message that directly undermines their own track record? This is where things get really interesting. Because Michelle Obama's speech wasn't just an appeal to voters, it was a signal to the Democratic establishment itself. And it suggests that behind the scenes, there is far more division and dissatisfaction than they're willing to admit publicly. For months, there were whispers that Barack Obama had played a role in pressuring Biden to step down, that top Democratic donors were losing confidence, that behind closed doors, the party's most influential figures were already planning for a post-Biden future. And now, with Michelle Obama on stage lamenting the state of the country, it's not just speculation anymore, it's confirmation. Her speech didn't sound like a speech from someone who believed in the Biden-Harris administration. It didn't even sound like a speech meant to rally people behind their leadership. It sounded like a warning, a quiet, strategic distancing, and the timing couldn't be more obvious. Think about this. If the Democratic Party had full confidence in Biden, Michelle Obama's speech would have been different. It would have focused on how much progress had been made, how much stronger America was under his leadership, and why re-electing Kamala Harris was the natural next step. But that's not what she did. Instead, she talked about how things had gone wrong, how hope had been lost, how America was at a turning point. These aren't the words of someone defending an administration. They're the words of someone pivoting away from it. And this is exactly what Megyn Kelly exposed. She pointed out the contradiction that every major news outlet refused to touch. Michelle Obama was admitting, in not-so-subtle terms, that the Biden presidency had failed. And if that's the case, then why would anyone believe that Kamala Harris, Biden's vice president, his closest political ally, the person who has been at his side for every major decision, would be any different? This is where Michelle Obama's speech becomes even more revealing. Because if she had full confidence in Kamala Harris, she would have made that clear. She would have emphasized why Harris was the right leader for this moment, why she was different, why she was capable of restoring this so-called lost hope. But she didn't do that. Her speech, for all its dramatic pauses and carefully crafted lines, was curiously vague when it came to actually supporting Kamala Harris. There was no strong endorsement, no compelling case for why Harris was the right choice, no passionate defense of her leadership. Why? Because the Democratic Party knows that Harris is deeply unpopular. They know she's polling worse than Biden. They know that even among Democrats, there is significant hesitation about her leadership. So instead of making a strong case for Kamala Harris, Michelle Obama focused on something broader and safer: hope. A concept that is emotionally powerful but also conveniently undefined. And that's what made Megyn Kelly's reaction so important. Because while the media spent hours praising Michelle Obama's delivery, Kelly focused on what wasn't being said. She pointed out that Michelle Obama had no real defense of Biden's presidency. She highlighted the contradiction in claiming that America needed a fresh start while also endorsing the people who had been in charge. And she raised the biggest question of all. If Michelle Obama truly believes that America is in crisis, then who is responsible for that crisis? It's a question the Democrats don't want people asking, because the moment you acknowledge that America is struggling, you open the door to one of two conclusions. Either the Democratic Party has failed, or they're deliberately using fear to manipulate voters. And if it's the latter, if Michelle Obama's speech was meant to create the illusion of crisis in order to position the Democrats as the saviors of that crisis, then it's one of the most cynical political tactics we've seen in years. So now we have to ask, was Michelle Obama's speech an honest reflection of her party's failures, or was it a strategic move to reset the Democratic narrative and distance the Obamas from Biden's unpopularity? And more importantly, if even Michelle Obama is unwilling to fully defend Biden's presidency, then why should the American people? The wealth hypocrisy. Does Michelle Obama take more than she needs? Michelle Obama stood on stage, commanding the attention of millions, and delivered a message that, at first glance, seemed noble, even admirable. She spoke about the struggles of ordinary Americans, about the need for fairness, about how her mother had always told her that people shouldn't take more than they need. But there was one glaring problem with this statement, one that the media conveniently ignored.
We need all of you, because right now, as you know, this race is close.
Because when it comes to personal wealth, the Obamas haven't just taken what they need. They've amassed a financial empire worth over $70 million, possibly closer to $100 million. They own not one, not two, but 4 multi-million-dollar homes, including a $20 million beachfront mansion on Martha's Vineyard. They have luxury, power, and influence that most Americans could never even dream of. So the question is simple. When Michelle Obama warns against taking more than you need, is she talking about herself? Or, as many suspect, is this yet another example of a wealthy liberal elite preaching equality while living by an entirely different set of rules? This isn't a conspiracy. This isn't speculation. The numbers don't lie. Let's break it down. The Obamas rose to prominence on a platform of fighting for the working class, advocating for wealth redistribution, and calling for higher taxes on the rich. But since leaving the White House, they've built a personal brand that has been astonishingly lucrative. Barack and Michelle Obama signed a $65 million book deal for their memoirs. They secured a massive production contract with Netflix worth an estimated $50 million. They regularly command 6-figure speaking fees, with Michelle Obama earning as much as $700,000 per speech. And that's just the beginning. Their real estate portfolio is just as extravagant. In addition to their $20 million Martha's Vineyard estate, the Obamas own an $8.1 million mansion in Washington, D.C., a $8.7 million beachfront home in Hawaii, and their original $1.65 million home in Chicago. These aren't modest homes. These are massive luxury properties with private beaches, multiple guest houses, and expansive estates, far beyond what anyone would consider a necessity. So let's ask the obvious question. Does Michelle Obama truly believe in what she's saying? Or is this just political theater? And if she does believe in it, then why hasn't she and her husband led by example? The hypocrisy is impossible to ignore. Democrats constantly push for wealth redistribution. But when it comes to their own fortunes, the rules seem to magically change. The Obamas lecture Americans about income inequality, yet they continue to expand their wealth at an unprecedented rate. They tell the public that the rich should pay more, yet they themselves have carefully structured their business dealings to minimize their own tax burden. And let's go even further. Michelle Obama has frequently voiced support for open borders and policies that allow more illegal migrants into the United States. She has criticized conservatives for opposing mass immigration, accusing them of lacking compassion. But here's the thing. If Michelle Obama truly believed in helping struggling migrants, why hasn't she opened up even one of her 4 luxury homes to house them? Think about that for a moment. The Obamas own more homes than they could possibly need. They have millions in liquid assets. They have the power and influence to make a real, tangible difference in the lives of struggling families. But instead of taking action, instead of practicing what they preach, they hoard their wealth while telling middle-class Americans that they should give more and sacrifice for the greater good. And this isn't just about Michelle Obama. This is a pattern among wealthy liberal elites. Look at Bernie Sanders, the self-proclaimed socialist who owns 3 homes, including a lakefront vacation house worth over $500,000. Look at Elizabeth Warren, who rails against Wall Street while collecting massive book deals and speaking fees. Look at Nancy Pelosi, whose net worth is estimated at over $120 million, largely thanks to her husband's stock trading, which conveniently seems to always align with major policy changes in Congress. These are the same people who insist that the rich should give back while continuing to accumulate massive personal wealth. And yet, when a conservative businessman like Donald Trump is wealthy, the media treats it as evidence of greed and corruption. But when the Obamas or the Pelosis or the Sanders of the world do the exact same thing, silence. So let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here. Michelle Obama is not struggling. She is not a working-class champion. She is a multi-millionaire who lives in luxury while telling ordinary Americans that they should do more to support government programs. Her words are empty because they are not backed by action. If she truly believed that no one should take more than they need, she would be the first to start downsizing her own lifestyle. But she hasn't, and she won't. And that should tell you everything you need to know. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about making life better for working Americans. This isn't about fairness. This is about control. The people who preach about redistribution are almost always the ones who have the most to lose. They don't actually want to share their wealth. They want to secure their power. They want the average person to have less while they accumulate more. They want a system where they decide who has too much, where they control the narrative, where they sit at the top while telling everyone else to sacrifice. And Michelle Obama's speech at the DNC? That was nothing more than another well-rehearsed political performance designed to keep people distracted from the reality of who she really is. The political power play. Did the Obamas engineer Biden's exit? Michelle Obama's speech at the Democratic National Convention wasn't just notable for what she said. It was just as revealing for what she didn't say. She had the stage, the spotlight, and an audience hanging onto every word. This was her chance to deliver a full-throated endorsement of Joe Biden, to defend his record, to convince voters that his leadership had been a success. But instead of doing that, she spoke about dread, disappointment, and a loss of hope. That's not exactly the message you'd expect from someone rallying behind an administration they believe in. And it raises a question that no one in the mainstream media wants to ask. Was Michelle Obama subtly signaling that Biden was never supposed to finish this race? For months, there had been growing speculation that the Democratic Party's biggest donors and strategists had lost faith in Biden's ability to win. His approval ratings had been in free fall. His public appearances were becoming harder to watch. Even his closest allies in the media were struggling to spin his leadership as anything but a liability. And yet, for the longest time, Democratic leadership insisted he was the guy. They shut down primary challengers. They treated the idea of him stepping down as unthinkable. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, he was gone. And the same people who had spent years propping him up were suddenly acting as if this was always the plan. That's why Michelle Obama's speech is so important. Because it wasn't just a speech. It was a carefully crafted reset button for the Democratic Party. It wasn't about defending Biden's record. It was about preparing voters for a post-Biden future. And the biggest question of all, was Barack Obama himself behind Biden's exit? Let's take a step back. It's no secret that Barack Obama has remained one of the most influential figures in the Democratic Party. Even after leaving the White House, his influence has never faded. His endorsement was crucial to Biden winning in 2020. And behind the scenes, he has maintained deep connections with top Democratic donors, party insiders, and strategists. And over the past year, the whispers about his role in Biden's departure have only grown louder. Political analysts have pointed to multiple reports that suggest Obama was one of the key figures who convinced Biden to step aside, that he, along with major Democratic donors, saw the writing on the wall. Biden wasn't going to beat Trump. If they wanted to keep the White House, they needed a new plan. But here's where things get even more interesting. If the Democratic Party was moving away from Biden, why did they replace him with Kamala Harris? This is a move that at first glance doesn't seem to make sense. Harris has been one of the most unpopular vice presidents in modern history. Her approval ratings have been consistently underwater. Even among Democratic voters, there was little enthusiasm for her candidacy. So why did the party, after pushing out Biden, immediately rally around Harris? The answer may lie in something far bigger than the 2024 election. Because if the Democratic establishment, including the Obamas, engineered Biden's exit, they weren't just thinking about 2024. They were thinking long-term. They were thinking about who controls the future of the party. And that's where Michelle Obama's speech becomes even more revealing.
8 years since I first came to this convention to talk with you about why I thought my husband should be president.
She wasn't there to promote Biden. She wasn't even there to make a compelling case for Harris. She was there to position the Obamas as the stabilizing force of the Democratic Party. Think about the messaging in her speech. It wasn't about policies. It wasn't about defending Biden's record. It was about the need for hope, the need for new leadership, the need for someone to guide the country through its dark times. That's not an endorsement of the current administration. That's a strategic distancing from it. And the timing couldn't be more suspicious. Just months before the DNC, as reports swirled about Biden's possible departure, political insiders began speculating about Michelle Obama as a potential future presidential candidate. Some suggested she could be an emergency replacement for Biden in 2024 if things went south. Others argued that she was being positioned for a 2028 run. Of course, Michelle Obama has publicly denied any interest in running for office. But let's be honest, so did her husband. Before 2008, Barack Obama dismissed questions about running for president, calling the idea ridiculous. 2 years later, he was in the White House. So should we really believe that Michelle Obama is completely out of the political game? Or is it possible that this speech, this entire DNC moment, wasn't just about Kamala Harris, but about testing the waters for Michelle's own political future? And if that's the case, then Biden's exit wasn't just a reaction to poor polling. It was part of a much larger plan, a plan to clear the way for the next era of Democratic leadership, with the Obamas still at the center of it all. This is exactly why Megyn Kelly and other commentators were so quick to call out Michelle Obama's speech for what it really was. Not just a campaign moment, but a political maneuver. And here's what makes this even more fascinating. If the Obamas are planning a long-term political comeback, they wouldn't do it suddenly. They wouldn't make it obvious. They would do it in stages. Step 1, push Biden out. That's done. Step 2, support Harris just enough to keep the party together. That's in progress. Step 3, wait for the perfect moment to step back in. That moment might not be 2024. It might be 2028, but make no mistake, the pieces are already being moved into place. So now we have to ask, was Michelle Obama's speech really about uniting the party? Or was it about setting the stage for something far bigger? And if the Obamas are still pulling the strings behind the scenes, who is really running the Democratic Party? The Obamas' influence and the 2024 election strategy. The Democratic National Convention wasn't just a platform to endorse Kamala Harris. It was something far bigger, a moment to solidify the Obamas' influence over the future of the Democratic Party. The speeches, the messaging, the carefully curated optics, it all pointed to a clear and undeniable reality. Barack and Michelle Obama are still the most powerful figures in the party, and they're making sure it stays that way. But here's the real question. Is this about Kamala Harris, or is this about keeping the Obamas at the center of American politics? Because let's be honest, if the Democratic Party truly believed in Kamala Harris, they wouldn't need Michelle Obama to step in as the emotional anchor of the convention. They wouldn't need Obama-era figures still holding the party together. They wouldn't need to keep invoking Barack Obama's legacy every time they struggle to sell their candidates to the public. The reality is, Barack Obama has never fully left politics. He may not hold office anymore, but behind the scenes, he has remained deeply involved in shaping the party's direction. His endorsements carry more weight than any other living Democrat. His donor network is one of the most powerful in the country. His influence over key policy groups, media figures, and grassroots organizations has never faded. And now, with Biden out of the picture, that influence is more visible than ever. Michelle Obama's speech at the DNC wasn't just an endorsement of Kamala Harris. It was a reminder to the Democratic establishment that the Obamas are still the ones holding everything together. It was a carefully orchestrated moment designed to do two things at once. One, distance the Obamas from the failures of the Biden presidency, and two, position themselves as the stabilizing force that will carry the Democratic Party forward. And this is where things get even more interesting, because for years Michelle Obama has dismissed the idea of running for office. She's publicly said she has no interest in politics. She's repeatedly stated that she has no plans to ever run for president. But didn't Barack Obama say the same thing once? Before 2008, Barack Obama downplayed any serious talk of running for president. He was still a junior senator. He was still building his brand. He told interviewers that he wasn't thinking about the presidency, that it wasn't part of his plans. And then, just 2 years later, he announced his campaign. So are we really supposed to believe that Michelle Obama is completely out of the political game? Her presence at the DNC suggests otherwise. She didn't have to speak at this convention. She could have remained in the background. She could have quietly supported Kamala Harris without stepping into the spotlight. But she didn't. She took center stage. She delivered one of the most high-profile speeches of the entire event. And in doing so, she placed herself right in the middle of the Democratic Party's transition away from Biden. And this is what makes the 2024 election strategy so fascinating. Because if Michelle Obama were even considering a presidential run in the future, whether in 2008 or beyond, this is exactly how she would start laying the groundwork. First, she distances herself from the failures of the Biden administration. She acknowledges America's struggles but avoids placing any real blame on the Democratic Party. She frames herself as a voice of reason, a source of stability, a beacon of hope. Second, she positions herself as above partisan politics. Her speech wasn't about policy. It wasn't about Democratic talking points. It was about emotions, about feelings, about unity. This is how politicians lay the foundation for a campaign without actually announcing one. And third, she lets speculation do the work for her. She doesn't need to announce a campaign. All she needs to do is let the media, the donors, and the political strategists start imagining what it would look like. And make no mistake, they are already imagining it. For months, there have been reports that top Democratic donors and strategists have been quietly discussing the possibility of a Michelle Obama presidential run. Some have suggested that she would be the party's strongest option in 2028. Others have gone even further, suggesting that if Kamala Harris struggles in the general election, Michelle Obama could be positioned as a last-minute replacement. Of course, this is all just speculation for now, but the larger question remains. Do Americans really want more of the same policies that led to this moment? Because as much as the Obamas try to position themselves as above the political failures of the past 4 years, the reality is that their influence has never gone away. The policies that have led to skyrocketing crime in major cities, the economic struggles that have crushed the middle class, the division that has only deepened over the years, these aren't new problems. They didn't start with Joe Biden. They have been building for over a decade. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.